Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. I'm Matt Prame, Eric Scopel on the show as always, and today we're welcoming in managing editor Steve Bartle of UteZone, our 24/7 sports affiliate for the Utah Utes. Steve, thanks for coming on the show, and we've got a really big football game this weekend.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, guys. It's always good to work together with you guys. You guys are, two of our favorites here at UteZone, so it's good to be on the podcast. And pretty big showdown this weekend in Rice-Eccles Stadium. It should be a really good game, hopefully at least. And it's good to be here with you guys to talk about it a little bit.
So, set the stage here. What do you expect Rice-Eccles Stadium to be like? If it was in Autzen and these two teams were playing, I would say it's probably the best crowd of the year, probably. What's the expectation that you're gonna walk into, that Eric's gonna walk into at Rice-Eccles Stadium Saturday night?
Yeah, I would expect that very, very thing to be the case here at Rice-Eccles Stadium. This to be the best crowd of the season. It's been interesting this year with, Utah didn't get USC, they didn't get BYU, which are typically the big games for Utah, but they had Arizona State, which was a big time matchup at the time, where you had Arizona State playing really well. That was essentially for the South Division lead at that point last month. And then you had UCLA, which was the blackout game, which was, those turned out to be pretty good crowds. But without a doubt, I do expect this to be the biggest crowd and the best crowd for sure. Just with every, with Ute fans, but then also Ducks fans. Like, Ducks fans travel. There's a lot of Ducks fans here in Utah as well. Like, I know a few. I'm friends with a few of them, and so it should just be a packed house, and it'll be cool. For a lot of the Oregon fans, Rice-Eccles Stadium just, they completed their south renovation, so it's going to look a little bit different than the last time you guys were probably here, and so it should be cool, a pretty cool experience for everybody.
I'm excited to get down there, in part because you guys have the best, I would say, media spread for food perspective in the Pac-12.
Dude, that's so funny because me and we always talk about the food spreads at the press box. Like, by far the worst experience was Oregon State.
Yeah.
Thank you.
They give you a coupon for like a pretzel, and not like that was just. I was like, what the hell is this? But Utah, we tried. They try to take care of you and give you a good spread. It's always pretty good food.
Matt's missing. Stadium. I was going to say Matt's missing out because he usually makes these trips, and they actually last couple of times I've been down, they have someone carving the ham for you. I mean, they've got. Yeah. I mean, they do it all out. I mean, it's not your box sandwich lunch that we get at Autzen or that we got up in Seattle.
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly it. They provide a caterer from Rice-Eccles Stadium, and we've had brisket the last couple of weeks. Some chicken,
man, don't tell me that.
Au gratin potatoes, and just like, they do a good job of feeding us. So it's good that you're here, Eric. Sorry, Matt. Like, sorry you're missing out here.
I get to go to Vegas the next day, so.
Oh, there you go. Well, that works too.
Trade works out.
Everything's gonna work out. All right, let's get to some actual football stuff. Because I do the food there is great. I'm really excited for that on Saturday, but I digress. From an injury perspective, Steve, can you get us up to date here? Because it seemed like there were a couple of key Utah players who didn't play against Arizona, and then a couple more that might have been banged up in that game. Starters, key players that you maybe aren't sure will play, or won't sure they'll play against Oregon.
For the most part, like, Utah has been pretty healthy this year. Like, I know Oregon has lost a few key guys this year. Utah's been fortunate to be pretty healthy. There were a couple guys held out in the last game, namely Tavion Thomas, and then also Keaton Bills, an offensive lineman who had missed the last few weeks with an injury, and then also wide receiver Theo Howard. Sounds like those guys are trending in the right direction, where we almost expect their return this weekend. And then, in that Arizona game over the weekend, Fabian Marks looks like he went down with a pretty significant injury, a non-contact type of an injury. And then also, Paul Miley and Nick Ford, but also left that game with injuries, but it sounds like, Nick Ford has made it clear, like, he's fine. He just had cramps, really bad cramps apparently, but still. So overall, like, Utah's coming into this thing pretty healthy, and they should be pretty good from that perspective.
2 questions. How is Britton Covey still on this football team, and how is he still a junior? It feels like he's been here for like 15 years. And more importantly, just Cameron Rising. What does he mean to this team? And I guess what happened with him getting put into the starting lineup that's kind of jump-started this program to where it should have been at the start of the year?
Yeah, it's wild. Britton Covey's first year was that, it was 2015. And if you guys remember, that was
the punt.
That 62. That was the
unbelievable
punt fake, the 62 to what was that? 62 to 20.
Yep.
Like that was his first year of college, and that was 6 years ago, and he's still just a junior. Like it's crazy. So, obviously he served a church mission after his first year of playing. So he was gone for 2 years. He returned in 2018, had an injury, so he medically redshirted. And then I think he still has like a red shirt available, so he could play another 2 years if he wanted to. I think.
Oh my Lord.
Like it's wild his eligibility. I don't think he'll play another 2 years. But yeah, he's been around the program for a number of years. And the crazy thing is he's not even the oldest guy on the team still. Like there's only like 2 or 3 that are older than him. But yeah, he's been around here for a long, long time. And then, in terms of Cameron Rising and what he's done for this Utah team, it starts with his personality and his leadership. He is a guy that just confidence is not an issue for him. Guys that play with swagger, with confidence, like that is Cameron Rising. And kind of getting deep into it, here, but with the type of athletes that Utah recruits, they aren't the four-star and 5-star kids that just have that, I don't want to say they just that don't necessarily have that same kind of confidence. You know what I mean? Like those 4 and 5-star guys, those are typically your alpha dogs that just they're going to do their thing no matter what against whoever. And, especially at the skill positions, like, Utah's got a couple walk-ons playing big roles out at wide receiver. Got a couple guys that came from, your non-traditional routes to college football. Dalton Kincaid came from, essentially a non-scholarship program at San Diego, and now he's one of the top playmakers on this team. And, a couple of these guys on the team needed somebody to almost believe in themselves before it translated to the field. And that's kind of the impact that Cameron Rising has really had on this team, is his belief and confidence has, trickled its way down through the rest of the team, throughout the rest of the offense. And it's really elevated the level of play from everybody. So that's kind of the non-traditional kind of impact that he's had. But in terms of just his play, he's provided Utah with a quarterback that's able to make accurate throws at all levels of the field. And that's really benefited this team, specifically in pass protection, where, you can't just sit at 10 yards in deep coverage and tee off downhill. Now you have to actually defend deep. And it's opened up opportunities, in the intermediate and short areas of the field. And it's been interesting to kind of see that impact, with Cameron Rising compared to Charlie Brewer, who, the book on him was he didn't have the strongest arm. He wasn't able to throw it over the top of the defense. And you see, defenses from those first 3 games just had their foot on the gas in terms of blitzing, in terms of getting downhill. And Utah struggled pretty mightily in 2 of those non-conference games. But since Cameron Rising has taken over, he's opened up the passing game, which has also benefited the run game as well. And so, his impact has been huge, and also his mobility has been a big benefit to the run game as well. So he's been a big difference maker for Utah since he took over against Washington State.
Steve, I want to follow up a little bit on the Brewer Rising stuff in fall camp. Was it Was there what was the conversation around this? So was it most people figured Brewer was the right choice, but maybe Rising had higher upside later? Were there people that really felt Rising maybe was the right choice and were questioning it? And then I guess just how do you catch yourself all looking back thinking if they would have had Rising in those 2 non-conference games against BYU and San Diego State, how different the optics might be for not just this matchup, but honestly for the entire Pac-12, because having 2 teams that are in that top 10, 12 range. I was thinking about this last night as the rankings dropped, or I guess on Tuesday night, of just, it feels like if Utah was 10 to 12 here, these games would mean a little bit different, I guess, just from a national perspective. Like you caught yourself kind of in that mindset of, boy, this thing could have been different if Rising was the quarterback in September rather than getting it at the end there, I guess.
I've always kind of had the mindset that it wasn't necessarily bad quarterback play. But as time has gone on, I've kind of seen the impact that I detailed, just a couple minutes ago about his impact and his ability to throw the ball deep and how that's kind of opened up, opportunities and kind of forced defenses to take their foot off the gas in terms of their aggressiveness. And I do wonder, how much that would have impacted Utah in those first 3 games. I still think that there were other issues that needed to be ironed out in those 2 games. So I don't know how much of an impact it would have made in terms of the end result, but I do think there would have been a benefit to having him back there. Now, with that said, it's important to understand why it was Charlie Brewer versus Cameron Rising. Cameron Rising, if you remember last year, hurt his shoulder in the very first game of 2020 against USC. And so it was a season-ending injury, and it was the type of injury where, it's not like a ACL or an MCL. It was one of those things where I think, it was a shoulder injury on his throwing arm. And so that's, it's going to take a lot of time to get back to normal, to get back to 100%. And then even then, is he really at 100% in terms of his ability to make throws as a quarterback, right? And I think that was kind of why Utah brought in Charlie Brewer, because, you never know with injury recoveries, how guys are going to come back from them, especially with something like that, where it's an injury to his throwing shoulder. So they brought in Charlie Brewer, who had a ton of experience, like 4 years at Baylor, almost 10,000 total yards. I think he had 10,000 total yards, if I remember correctly. And it's like, yeah, you expect him to come in and take control of the things. I think Utah looked at this team and felt they were just a quarterback away from being a really competitive team. And ultimately they were right. It's just that they had that quarterback on the roster the entire time. It's just with his injury, you couldn't lean on him. You couldn't expect him to come back by fall camp and be 100%, so you had to take measures to protect yourself. And once they got into fall camp, I think throughout the offseason, everybody kind of expected Charlie Brewer to be the guy. He had a great spring ball. But as we got into fall camp, Cameron Rising made a very strong impression. And a lot of people that I talked to viewed them as, neck and neck, throughout fall camp, where Brewer would have a good day, Cameron Rising would have a good day. And it was as close as it could be in terms of the competition. So, ultimately, Whittingham cited experience with Charlie Brewer as kind of the deciding factor there. And that makes sense. And credit to Cameron Rising is, he never let that impact how he went about his business since he was told that he wasn't going to be the starter. He was named a captain even before they made the decision to go with Brewer as the starter. And so, he continued to fill that role really, really well. And I think in a lot of ways, with how the season started and with how Cameron Rising continued to be a positive impact player on the sidelines, it really allowed the team to kind of rally around him once he did enter, the field of play. And you've seen it in the results, since that, they've won. I think they've only lost 1 game since he's taken over. And so he's had a big, big impact on this.
Is this Utah team ahead of schedule for having the type of year that it is? Because I look at the depth chart, there's 11 redshirt freshmen second-year freshmen or true freshmen playing? And I understand COVID, some guys may have gotten 4 or 5 games in last year, but 11 of those guys are listed as starters. There's 16 freshmen listed as backups on the depth chart. This team feels very, very young.
Yes.
Are they ahead of schedule, you feel like?
I do. No, I do feel like they're ahead of schedule. Like, as you said, there are a number of freshmen and even sophomore. Like, I think in total there are 63 freshmen and sophomore on this roster. And obviously that's part COVID freshmen and all of that. But in terms of just freshmen and sophomore, second and third year players, and first year players, 63 guys on the roster. So it's a young team. It's a team that, with what happened last year where Utah was only able to play 5 games, they don't even have the typical experience that you would expect from a typical season, right? So in terms of their expectations, within the program, they felt like they had a team in terms of their talent level that could compete this season. But even then, like I do think that this team has been a pleasant surprise. I think we had to take a step back and kind of realize the impact that the last year had on this team early on, where they were, again, just kind of the realization that last year wasn't a typical year where you can expect your typical growth, just because not only was it 5 games, but then you also were limited in practice through various means where, some guys couldn't be full contact. A lot of position groups where defensive tackle, like Utah's defensive line, that's a big key to their development as Utah's, practice and learning how to play that physical brand of football. That's accomplished through practice, and they weren't able to do those types of things. And so, this group took a big step forward after their non-conference slate. And, once that Washington and USC games happened, I think this team really kind of realized how good they could be, and they've taken off. It's been a really impressive turnaround. But yeah, I would say that this group is ahead of schedule just because there is a lot of youth. And you look ahead, to next year, and Utah could return the majority of this roster and be in contention again next year. So, it's pretty intriguing looking down the road from that aspect. But yeah, there's a lot of youth, and this group is playing at a pretty good level where they're, competing for the South Division, potentially the Pac-12. So pretty impressive from this Utah squad.
Steve, obviously Utah knows full well how Kayvon Thibodeau can wreck a game. I'm also now looking, not trying to take a shot, but it's true. I think it might have landed. No, but the reason I bring this up is obviously he's going to be a key player in this game. But Utah is right now best in the conference at protecting its quarterback, one of the best run offenses. This offensive line for Utah, because I was looking back at what they were at 19. Obviously, that was an awesome run offense, but they were only 6th in the Pac-12 in protecting the quarterback. Part of that might have been that Pac-12 championship game skewing it because the sacks allowed were really close there, and they dropped a bunch because of it.
Yeah.
But is this group feel better equipped to kind of manage Thibodeau and Oregon's front in general? Because I think we've seen at Oregon, especially the last month or so, that feels like, and it didn't feel this way early on in the season, really the strength of the defense is its front. How does that matchup line up for Utah? What have you seen from this group from an offensive perspective?
Well, I'll tell you what, like Kayvon Thibodeau still provides plenty of nightmares for, Utah, for Utah fans, for everybody involved with the, with the program. Like what he was able to do in that Pac-12 championship game 2 years ago was it was incredible. He was a true freshman that year, right?
Yes.
He wasn't just so stupid what he was able to do. And so, coming into this game, like I do think that this offensive line is better equipped, just based on the experience of the offensive line. Like that 2019 team had 2 redshirt freshmen, one of which had just returned from his LDS mission and made the switch from defensive line to offensive line the year before. So really new to the position. It had another guy that was 2 years in the program. So it was a really young offensive line. And that's not so much the case this year. This is a much more experienced offensive line. There are two guys that played on that offensive line on this group, Nick Ford and Braden Daniels. And so that experience for them should benefit them coming into this one, because they know and experienced it firsthand just how much of an impact player Thibodeau can be. But yeah, I do think that this offensive line is better equipped. But again, I think everybody's kind of coming into this one with the mindset that this is a big test. Like, a lot of people still aren't sold on the offensive line, despite coming into this one as the top team in pass protection. They've allowed the fewest amount of pressures since week 4 in the Pac-12. And so they've faced some good defenses. USC, they've got a first round talent in Drake Jackson, and then also Corey Foreman on that defensive line. Tulu Polotu is another defensive lineman on that front that's really good. Arizona State came into that game leading the conference in sacks and TFLs with a very good defensive line, and they aced both of those tests essentially. UCLA came into the game, as one of the top run defenses. They brought a very aggressive mindset in terms of their aggressiveness and blitzing and all of that, and they aced that test essentially. But still, I think this is arguably the biggest test that this offensive line will face this year, because it's not only like, as much as this is about Thibodeau, like, there are other guys on this defensive front for Oregon. Brandon Dorless is really good. And you guys know better than I do, but that entire defensive front, and then you add Noah Sewell with his capability as a blitzer. It's a very tough defensive front, and this offensive line has arguably the biggest challenge this weekend.
Steve, talk me off this theory, because Eric and I and our counterpart Jared, earlier this week, we recorded a show, and I ended it with saying, as we've kind of talked this game out, I've kind of convinced myself that if I was betting on this game, I would hammer Oregon as an underdog, because I think on paper, and I understand games are not played on paper, and I'm not trying to slight Utah in the slightest, because I think they are the best program in developing players in the conference. But I think on paper, Oregon is by far the more talented football team. And so I'm telling myself, I think Oregon's defensive line is better than what it was in 2019. I think their offensive line is just as consistent as they were in 2019. I think the receivers are an upgrade. Obviously, the quarterback is not. The running backs are the same guys. I'm trying to tell myself, expect a close game, but everything tells me Oregon should win this game, and it shouldn't be a surprise if they win it by 8-9 points.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong, Matt. Like, it's hard not to look at this game on paper and think, how in the world is Utah the favorite here? I look at this game, and I've watched 3 games of Oregon over the last couple of days. I've watched the Washington game, the Stanford game, and then also a little bit of the Ohio State game, just to kind of get a feel for what opponents were able to do and how they were able to have success, and then also what Oregon was doing. And the thing that stood out to me specifically in that Stanford game was Tanner McKee made some really great throws. And I think that more than anything else was the difference. There's a ton of talent on that defense for Oregon, and you've got to come into this one and you've got to execute at a really high level. It demands a lot. When you've got a lot of talent like Oregon does, it allows you a bigger margin of error, right? And so you've got to, if for the opponent, you've got to raise your level of play to a really high level. We've seen Cameron Rising play at a good level against USC. We saw it against ASU, but he's going to have to take it up a notch for this Utah team to really have a legitimate shot at pulling this one off. I look at Oregon, and that offensive line is really, really impressive. Do I think it's as good as 2019? That 2019 offensive line was really, really impressive. Just the amount of experience. It's not the same talent that this 2021 version has, but the experience, the know-how, all of that. It was arguably the best offensive line that I've seen up close. Like, it was really, really impressive. I was on the sideline for that 2019 game, and they just, man, they had their way in that second half. It was tough to see, and I'm an unbiased media member, but it was tough to see. But this group for Oregon this year, it's a big, massive offensive line. They do a great job of with their offense in terms of counters and pulls and pins and pulls and all of this stuff, where these are big monster offensive linemen that can move well out in space. And Utah has struggled with these big mauling offensive lines. If you go to that Oregon State game, they don't even have the big bodies that Oregon does, and they were able to create a lot of movement up front. And Oregon, that's what they've done over the last couple of games is, they've had Travis Dye running behind them. And so, there's a ton of talent on this Oregon roster. And it's, I don't want to say I'm with you there, Matt, but like, I don't think you're wrong for feeling the way that you do to hammer, that Oregon money line and taking Oregon as the underdog here, because, they play a brand of football that can really kind of expose the Utah defense. It's struggled against the run quite a bit. And that talent level that they have there is really, really impressive.
Steve, am I oversimplifying this and saying this may come down to just who's better in the trenches? I know we talked about quarterback play, and you brought up the importance of like the Stanford matchup. I think you're right. Tanner McKee made some great throws in that game, especially that last drive or two. That would play a part. But I'm kind of looking at this going, man, Oregon's offensive line against Utah's defensive line and vice versa could kind of determine this. And that is sort of what it felt like in 2019. Is there more to it? Does there something else that pops up to you that says, that's way more important than what I'm talking about? Or does it feel like that's kind of maybe what it boils down to ultimately?
No, I think for the majority of the impact here, I do think that it belongs to who plays better in the trenches. Oregon is coming into this one with a great offensive line. Utah is coming into this one, feeling good about their offensive line play. I was looking at a measure by Football Outsiders. It's line yards produced. So it's yards produced by the offensive line. Oregon State is number 1. Oregon is number 2. And then Utah is number 9. And that's yards generated for the run game, right? So this is line yards is essentially how many yards do you create for the running back before they're touched? And so you've got 2 top 10 teams in this regard in this matchup with Oregon and Utah. And so, like a big impact on this game is going to come down to the trenches and who plays better in the trenches. And, there's going to be other deciding factors. Like I do think, who can make throws will have an impact on this game as well. Who can execute better in that regard. Special teams has been a bugaboo for Utah, and that could potentially, hurt them in this one as well. But ultimately, I do think that this comes down. If you're looking for the big deciding factor in this game, it's who plays better in the trenches. And if both play well, that's where you can kind of look at other factors here. But I do think, it starts with the guys in the trenches in this one.
We've gone this long and we've not mentioned Devin Lloyd, and that's a mistake. The best linebacker in the conference by far, I think. Just the importance of him for Utah, and also Nefi Sewell. This is Noah Sewell's brother. They played similar positions, kind of, at least from a linebacker standpoint. Just the importance of those 2 guys, and in particular Devin Lloyd. Oregon's offensive coordinator, Jeb Moorhead, said that he's just as good of a linebacker he's seen the last couple of seasons. I think that's saying something, especially considering, Oregon has one of the best linebackers in the conference on their own team. But I think Lloyd's better. Just your thoughts on just the importance of Lloyd, Nephi Sewell, and just those two guys and how they're going to have to play against a run team like Oregon, who's produced some really big games on the ground.
Yeah, with Devin Lloyd, like this is a guy that's come into the program. He was, a safety receiver type in high school, and Utah was like, no, like you're a linebacker at this level, and it's taken time. Like he's bought into kind of the process and learning and developing and growing, and the conversation for him, it starts with his work ethic. Like he just has that incredible work ethic where he's just going to outwork everybody and outwork himself. And he's turned himself into, a potential, if not, solidified his status as a first-round draft pick in the upcoming draft. And he's the type of player that can impact every phase of the game, right? He can defend the run. He can cover sideline to sideline. He can cover, he can drop in coverage, in zone, and man coverage. He can make plays. He's got ball skills. He can rush the passer. He does it all. So he's really, really good defending each phase of the game. And he's just kind of turned himself into a jack of all trades at the linebacker position. And he gives tremendous effort each and every time he steps on the field. So that's him, and his leadership for this team. It means everything. Like he is without question the leader of this team. And he's the type of leader where he's out in front and he's pulling people behind him. He's dragging everybody along with him, and he's going to bring them along for the ride, whether they want to or not. Like that's just the type of guy that he is. And so, he means everything to this defense. He's a big time playmaker. Obviously, you see the production. He's impacted just every phase. But, Nephi Sewell, what he's meant to this team, he's been a great compliment to Devin Lloyd, where, you can count on Devin Lloyd to be productive as he is. Nephi Sewell is kind of that interesting playmaker. I've kind of compared him like if Devin Lloyd is Steph Curry, then Nephi Sewell is Draymond Green, right? Where he's kind of the guy where he can make the plays. You don't always see his impact in the box score, where he's tallying the tackles that Devin Lloyd is, but his impact is made by a big time tackle for loss, where his instincts just lead him to making a play or a forced fumble here or there. Like that's kind of his impact. And he came to Utah as a safety and kind of turned himself into a linebacker. And you guys see it with Noah, with his instincts and his playmaking, just that knack for playmaking. Noah kind of possesses those same instincts and that same knack for the position. So they really, really feed off of each other really, really well. And they've led the way for this Utah defense the entire season.
Steve, I want to talk about rivalries and how they come about, because these two schools, when Utah joined the conference about a little over a decade ago, there was no rivalry. I was just looking at it earlier today. There was like 15 meetings. They were spread out over the course of several decades. There just really wasn't any bad blood, quote unquote. With the way the conference has kind of fallen into place here the last 2 to 3 seasons, and 2020 being a COVID year, you kind of remove it. It was weird for everybody.
Yeah.
The conference has kind of gone through these two schools recently. And obviously, I'm sure Utes feel like they owe Oregon something because Oregon took away a college football playoff berth. Utah's in the position to, repay the favor. I mean, to me, this is kind of this is the origins, or kind of the baseline for where rivalries start. Does it kind of feel like that's the case in Salt Lake? I mean, I know, again, because there aren't really geographical reasons for these schools to dislike each other. There's not, up until 2019, really too many reasons from an on-the-field perspective to dislike each other. But I'm guessing that there is a sense in Salt Lake right now that, like, the Pac-12 North is probably going through Oregon for a while, and the Pac-12 South should go through Utah for a while, and this is just kind of the start of it. Give me the Utah perspective on kind of these two schools meeting.
No, I think you're you're on something there, Eric. Like, I do think that Utah fans kind of look at this as a growing rivalry where, and it's not just like football, like basketball. Oregon basketball has had Utah's number for the last few years as well. And so, like, a lot of it is just out of frustration and jealousy for Utah fans because, you've had a lot of success in both in both sports. And, the Oregon wins, as whenever they come, they do mean a lot. Like, they mean a lot because they know, like, Utah fans know and understand there's a lot of talent coming into that Oregon program. And, these are big games, and Oregon is competing at a high level, and Utah, wants to be competing at that level at a consistent rate as well. And so it's awesome to see these two programs, at the level that they're at right now, where they're competing at the top of the conference. And yeah, like, I do think that this is a growing rivalry. Is this going to be like a UCLA USC type of rivalry? No, but I don't think it needs to be. Like, I think it can be that, interdivision, interconference type of a rivalry where, whenever these two do meet up, it's going to be, I don't want to say ugly, but it's going to be a big time battle. And I think that's what this is more than anything else. Is there's just a lot of respect on both sides of the ball for the opposing program. And it's really cool to have that and to have experienced that for Utah over the last couple of years. Obviously, like, Utah fans want to experience like the joys of beating you guys. Like, that certainly needs to come. But yeah, like, I do think that this is, a rivalry in its infancy stage. And it's been, there's been some impressive, some really good games that, most of them have gone in favor of Oregon, and you can go back to like I mentioned earlier, the 62-20 game. Like, you listen to the Utah, highlight video, and it starts with Kyle Whittingham. This is David and Goliath. And that was really like Utah's like coming out party. Like, I think he was like two giants. He called this isn't David and Goliath anymore. This is two giants. And that game, kind of served as Utah's coming out party as, a higher level program. And then from there have been more games, that Justin Herbert, Darren Carrington game, and what was that, 2017, 2016 or something like that. They scored the touchdown. So like, there's a lot of sour memories for Utah, and I think it's a lot of frustration more so than anything else, where they just want to, give it to you guys one time. But this is definitely a good rivalry, growing rivalry between these two programs.
Okay, Steve, we'll end it with this. Utah is kind of in a weird position if they want to make the Rose Bowl. I think beating any team twice, especially in 3 weeks, is very difficult to do. You could argue that it's probably more beneficial for Utah if Oregon wins the first round of these two meetings, because in Vegas, in the Pac-12 championship game, Oregon wins, they make the playoff, Utah goes to the Rose Bowl. Utah wins, they go to the Rose Bowl. What's kind of is this even a discussion among fans right now? Like a goofy discussion, because it is kind of strange.
Yeah, among fans, hell yeah, it's a conversation. Like, yeah, it's a big time conversation. Like, does Cameron Rising even start in this game? Should he start in this game? Like, yeah, it's that kind of conversation. But no, it's interesting, right? Like, if Utah loses, that helps Oregon's resume, right? Like, it kind of solidifies their spot, where they're at right now. And then you face off against them in another 2 weeks, as long as assuming Utah takes care of business against Colorado. But again, like, I'm not sure that that's a mindset that Utah is coming into this one. Like, they're always just going to bring their best. They're going to take control what they can control, because, even with that, like, let's say they do lose, like it's no guarantee that you're in the Rose Bowl, after the Pac-12 championship game, assuming Utah loses this one, they remain competitive in the Pac-12 championship game. Like, there's no guarantee, right? So unless you win that game. So it's an interesting dynamic with everything. Like, I think I saw a Reddit tweet where it was like, Utah has a 65% chance to make the Rose Bowl if they lose this weekend, compared to a 35% chance of going to the Rose Bowl if they win this weekend. And it's just like, it's crazy. And that's been the conversation, not just this week, but over the last couple of weeks for Utah fans. It's like, how do we really need to win this one? Like, I don't know. So it's certainly been a conversation among fans, but inside the program, like, I highly doubt Kyle Whittingham, of all people, is talking about that.
Without a doubt. Hey, Steve, thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Go check out UteZone for all their coverage leading up to this football game. And Eric and Jared Mack will meet you in Salt Lake City at the press box and enjoy the game on Saturday.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.